So one thing before I put this back together, I never got a real good answer about this light up Apple thing on the back, but I did want to test it and make sure that it actually worked. So I'm going to have to make a video later on, hopefully demonstrating how this works. But what's kind of cool is if you want to test it beforehand, we'll take just another battery. I took this out of an LG. And if we make contact here, positive and negative, you will see shortly that the Apple actually does light up. So what I've got to do is just get the diagram for where to connect this. I haven't really had much effective communication from the manufacturer. But when I do, I will do a follow-up video and show you how we can get that going. But for the time being, I'm going to go ahead and put the board back in. First time I did that, I had some lighting issues. So we're going to do this a little bit differently. This time I have a new camera, and I will try to minimize the amount of shadows that we have going into the inside of the phone. But for now, I'm just going to, I'm going to leave these wires exposed somewhat because I will be going back here later and setting that up. But for now, let's go ahead and get to the reassembly, and we will start with, or continue with the reassembly, I should say. Start with the motor here, which is going to go facing these two terminals on the inside. So let's see, am I backwards here? Looks like I am. So this actually goes here in the top. And let's see, I've got a screw that goes towards the upper end of the phone. It's kind of tricky to get this to where you will be able to see it. We'll start with this one. That way this thing should kind of stay in the right position. I'm probably shaking the table there a little bit. All right, and then we've got a retaining clip that goes on top, right over here. That plugs into the back. It doesn't plug in, but it helps to keep the motor stabilized. One thing about electric motors is that when they spin around, they do tend to cause screws to unwind. So you can see they've changed the design of this a little bit. Got a couple screws that will secure this into place, and they're somewhat fairly distant. There we go with the shadows again. Let's see if we can make this easy enough for you to see, hopefully. And one thing that I did get from the instructions for this light up back is that the negative terminal was going to be attached under this screw here, and the positive one is supposed to interface with the proximity sensor somehow, but I'm not sure exactly where. And as I stated earlier, they didn't really make that very clear. So hopefully this will stay focused while we continue with the installation of all this other stuff that's going to go inside. So trying to find a position where I can see what I'm doing, make sure that the camera is working properly. So we're going to have quite a few things that we put in, but we'll start with the logic board at this point. So remember, we've got this antenna wire that plugs in right on the back, and my hands are a little shaky today. Too much coffee. All right, once we plug that in, we'll have two up here that are going to connect at the top of the housing. And again, I've got these wires that just don't seem to have a very good place to go for now. So I think what we're going to do is tape these off just to get them out of the way until we get the phone back together. So I've got a little piece of Kapton tape here left over from another project. I'm just going to tape that down underneath the battery. As long as it's not connected to a power supply, we don't have to worry about anything shorting out. And make sure we don't pinch any of these cables on the way in. So we're going to route that main volume and power control, and then we'll have to lift up the charging port and the second antenna wire down at the bottom. And make sure we have these out of the way, just like that. And then we'll start with the two screws that connect these little pieces right up here. Very small screws. They will typically fall into about the right position. You might have to move them a little bit. Getting them to stay on the driver is always a challenge, so remember to magnetize every once in a while to make your life a lot easier. And if you need a smaller driver, you can always switch to something magnetic that's a little bit smaller that can be magnetized. So you'll want to double check and make sure that the camera is seated properly and that this flash lines up right here, just like that. Otherwise, if it looks like the camera's sticking up too much, you'll have problems getting the lens assembly back inside the phone. So now we have, I think I skipped a step here, because underneath this piece, we're going to have this, which goes over what would be the speakerphone mic, I believe. So this is going to sit right on top of here, underneath this cable, as I recall. Actually, it doesn't... see, yeah, so we want to go underneath this. These are always fun. Make sure you have a good pair of electrostatic tweezers to help you get this stuff into the right spot. And you see how small these screws are. And we will have one here that is a threaded barrel that goes into the top. I find those easiest to grab this way. And if you can just set the thread inside, usually you'll be able to get it started with, I'm going to grab another. Yeah, well, that's actually going to stick. These are just really a pain sometimes. In fact, I am going to grab a smaller driver. This type, these cheap screwdrivers that come with the parts, sometimes can be helpful. This one doesn't seem to want to stick at the moment. Let's see, where did you go? All right, so as long as we can get this to stick, we should be able to get it started. Never fun. Sometimes the easiest way to start a thread or start a screw is to actually turn it counterclockwise so that the thread seats properly, and then you can tighten it. And we don't have to crank these down too tight, just enough finger tightening, I would call it. That'll be fine there. We've got this bottom one. Now we can go ahead and put the flash back into this little housing on the board. All right, so at this point, let's go ahead and get some of the anchoring screws back in the bottom. We'll start down here at the very end, and the sooner you do this, the sooner you're going to be able to stabilize the logic board so nothing shifts around. And once we have at least one of the screws, that didn't even go in the bottom, or towards the center of the board, you can go ahead and start connecting the cables. But I like to have at least something holding the board in place. So the last thing we want to do is accidentally have the board slip and cause one of the cables to be stressed. And I usually try to do these one right after the other, kind of skip them on this one. This is the one that does not stick to a driver, some sort of alloy, so you'll have to actually set this in place up at the top in addition to the screw that goes inside. Neither one of these should stick to your screwdriver. If they do, you've probably mixed up your screws, and you'll find that they don't fit properly, and in the worst case scenario, you will strip out the threads, and that presents a whole new set of problems. Now at this point, I'll go ahead and reconnect the charging port cable, this antenna wire down here at the bottom, which can be tricky. I think I mentioned, actually I mentioned the first time I made the video, you can't really see it. So if you look here from the side, I'm actually, get an idea of where I'm sitting, I'm kind of looking at it this direction so I can get that lined up, because from the top it's really hard to tell where it is. And you can actually see that my water damage sticker turned red a long time ago. That was because I bought this phone from someone who got it wet. So as far as warranty, would be nothing left. Again, I'm trying to stay out of the shadows here. It's a little bit awkward. I'm certainly not a photographer. Okay. All right, so now we can go ahead and plug in our main flex cable for the volume and power controls. And let's see. So I think we'll be okay with this underneath the battery for now. Next thing we want to do is get this piece, this little retaining clip, installed. Sorry about the camera shaking. I just realized that this tripod is going to be a problem if I have it sitting on my bench. Try to keep that to a minimum. And the rest is pretty much downhill from here. If you've ever replaced a lens, you know the rest, but we'll go ahead and keep going just in case anyone is doing this for the first time, and I really hope that you aren't. This isn't a repair that I would start out with. I would certainly get some experience with replacing screens before you jump into something like this. But if you do, I certainly admire your ambition. All right, so from here, all we've got to do is install our lens. You'll need something to prop it up against. At least I would recommend that you do. Let's grab something here. I've actually got just another phone case laying around. That should give us enough to just keep this upright and not have it fall over and put stress on the flex cables. And look at that, I got lucky on the first two. Oh, all three just fell right into place. Your experience may not be the same. Usually these are kind of tricky to get lined up. I just happened to get lucky today. So what I always tell people is, as soon as you've got these plugged in, immediately get this plate installed, and don't let the cables shift around, because if you do, and they become even partially unplugged, you're going to get a screen full of lines. And if you do, don't panic, but you'll have to go back and reattach these cables. If they shift just a fraction of a millimeter, they will not line up, and the image on your screen, if it appears at all, will not look very good. Actually looks a bit like plaid white stripes going vertical and horizontal, and that's almost seemed like it cross-threaded. My poor phone has been taken apart many times, not always by me. And remember, this screw is going to have to be manually placed into the right area. Okay, and you'll also usually have to pull up a bit here. If your lens gets stuck behind the camera, it won't want to install, so you kind of have to make sure it's clearing this area. I'm going to let that, let's see, this is going to be tricky. So we'll need our battery. Go ahead and hold on to this for a moment. And I'm not going to worry about adhesive under the battery today. If you want to, you can add some. It's generally a good idea, just in case you experience any impact. It'll keep the battery from flopping around and damaging anything on the inside. But Haven't had that be a problem yet. So far, so good. And I had this suspicion that my battery is probably dead by now. So if this doesn't turn on, why aren't you sticking? This screw should absolutely stick to the driver. And it's going to be hard for me to magnetize with one hand, so I'm just going to set it in place. Hopefully somebody didn't mix that up and put the wrong screw there, but looks like that might be the case. Now, a screw that won't magnetize in the wrong area is not a problem, but a screw that does magnetize in an area where you shouldn't have one is probably going to cause some sort of interference. So you want to make sure that these are the right ones. And obviously we want to make sure that all of our screws are in the right position. But right, so from here you've got 3 tabs on the top of the screen, if you haven't noticed before. Those kind of tuck down into the housing, so you always want to make sure those go inside first. And as you hold that into place, you can kind of push this direction on the screen, and that allows it to slide up. And if you very carefully work your way down the edges like this, don't put a lot of pressure, everything should snap into place. You can see my screen's all full of fingerprints now. I'll have to clean that up. We'll hit the power button. And of course, oh, we've actually got an Apple. Thought my battery might be dead by now. And that's how you switch over to the gold housing. And I'll be back hopefully soon with a follow-up video showing you how to make the Apple light up on the back. Don't forget your SIM card tray, 2 screws at the bottom, and I'll see you next time. If you found the video helpful, hit the like button, share it with your friends, subscribe to my channel, and follow me on Twitter or Facebook. Post your questions in the comment section below or visit gocellphonerepair.com/forum. Thanks for watching.